Runaway Omega collapses at a stranger's door. She has no idea he's the Alpha King. The storm had been raging for 3 days, turning the mountain roads into rivers of mud and despair. Lightning split the darkness like angry claws, illuminating the massive stone fortress that rose from the rocky peaks like a sleeping giant. The Stormfang Keep, home to the most feared Alpha King in the Northern Territories. Celine pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. Her swollen belly contracted violently, sending waves of agony through her exhausted body. The baby was coming too soon. Much too soon. "Please," she whispered to the howling wind, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "Just a little longer. We're almost safe." Her bare feet were bloody and raw from weeks of running. The thin dress she wore hung in tatters, offering no protection against the bitter mountain cold. But she had made it. After 3 months of hiding, of running from shadows and sleeping in caves, she had finally reached the one place her enemies wouldn't dare follow. The gates of the Alpha King's fortress stood before her like the entrance to another world. Massive iron barriers twisted with ancient symbols, warded with magic so powerful she could taste it in the air, bitter and electric. 2 guards stood at attention despite the storm, their wolf eyes glowing amber in the darkness. Celine stumbled forward, her legs finally giving out. She collapsed onto the muddy ground with a splash, her hands instinctively protecting her belly as another contraction tore through her. "Help!" she gasped, looking up at the guards through the iron bars. Rain mixed with tears on her face. "Please. Sanctuary." The guards exchanged startled looks. Omegas didn't just appear at the Alpha King's gates in the middle of the night, especially not pregnant ones in the middle of a storm. "State your name and pack," the taller guard commanded, his hand moving to the silver weapon at his side. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never learned to show mercy. I can't." Celine tried to push herself up, but her vision blurred. The world tilted sideways, and she felt herself falling back into the mud. "The baby. Something's wrong." "Marcus, look at her eyes," the second guard whispered urgently. "Those aren't normal Omega eyes." It was true. Even through her pain and exhaustion, Celine's eyes held flecks of silver and gold, colors that shouldn't exist in an Omega's gaze. Colors that spoke of bloodlines older than memory. Inside the fortress, Alpha King Kale Stormfang was reviewing battle reports when the scent hit him like a physical blow. He dropped the parchment he'd been reading, his entire body going rigid with shock. Every instinct he possessed as an alpha screamed at once, but they weren't screaming in harmony. The scent was Omega, yes, sweet and desperate, heavy with approaching birth. But underneath that familiar sweetness was something else. Something that made his wolf pace restlessly in his mind, torn between the urge to protect and the urge to run. Ancient. Dangerous. Impossible. Kale was moving before he realized it, his boots echoing through the stone corridors as he made his way to the gates. The few servants still awake at this hour pressed themselves against the walls as he passed. When the Alpha King moved with that kind of focused intensity, wise wolves stayed out of his way. He reached the gates just as his guards were debating whether to open them. The Omega had collapsed completely now, her body curled protectively around her swollen belly. Even unconscious, her hands never stopped moving in gentle circles over her child. "Open the gates," Kale commanded, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade. "My lord," Marcus hesitated. "We don't know who she is. She could be." "I said open them." The iron barriers swung open with a groan that sounded almost alive. Kale stepped into the storm, and the full force of her scent hit him without the barriers to filter it. His knees nearly buckled. Bloodfang. The scent carried the unmistakable signature of the Bloodfang pack, the ancient wolf clan his grandfather had destroyed in the Great Purging 60 years ago. Every member had been hunted down and killed. Every trace of their bloodline had been wiped from the earth. Or so they had believed. Kale knelt beside the unconscious Omega, his large hands hovering over her rain-soaked form. Up close he could see the signs of her long flight, the calloused feet, the healing cuts on her arms, the way her body curved protectively around her unborn child even in unconsciousness. But it was her face that made his breath catch. Even pale with exhaustion and streaked with mud, she was beautiful in a way that seemed to glow from within. Her features held an otherworldly grace that marked her as something more than a common Omega. "Bring the healer," he ordered, carefully lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, too light. How long had she been surviving on scraps and determination? "And prepare the royal wing. She'll recover there." "The royal wing?" Marcus's voice cracked with shock. "My lord, she's just an Omega." Kale's golden eyes flashed dangerously. "She is under my protection now. Question that again, and you'll find yourself decorating the walls." As he carried her through the corridors, Celine stirred in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, those impossible silver-gold eyes, and for a moment they stared at each other in silence. "Am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Am I safe?" Something twisted in Kale's chest at the vulnerability in her voice. When was the last time someone had looked to him for protection rather than conquest? "You're safe," he said quietly, and meant it more than he had meant anything in years. Her eyes searched his face, taking in the sharp cheekbones, the golden eyes, the dark hair that fell across his forehead like shadows. Recognition flickered across her features, followed quickly by terror. You're the Alpha King," she breathed. Kale felt her body tense in his arms, preparing to flee even though she could barely keep her eyes open. It was then he realized she had no idea what her scent revealed. She didn't know that her very presence in his fortress was an impossibility. She didn't know that the child she carried should not exist. "Rest," he said instead of answering her unspoken questions. "We'll talk when you're stronger." But as her eyes drifted closed again, Kale caught the faintest whisper from her lips. He said the king would protect us. But he never said you'd be so. She fell unconscious again before finishing the thought, leaving Kale with more questions than answers. Who was he? And why did her words sound like prophecy? As he placed her gently on the silk sheets of the royal guest chamber, the storm outside began to quiet. But inside the fortress, a different kind of storm was just beginning. Because the scent clinging to her clothes wasn't just bloodfang. It was bloodfang mixed with something else. Something that made Kale's wolf snarl with recognition and rage. The scent of his own bloodline. The healer arrived moments later, a stern woman who had delivered half the nobility in the northern territories. She took one look at the unconscious Omega and went very, very still. "My lord," she said carefully, "this woman, her child." "What about her child?" The healer's ancient hands hovered over Celine's belly, her magical senses reading the life growing within. When she looked up, her face was pale with shock. "The child carries 2 alpha bloodlines, powerful ones. And my lord," she swallowed hard, "one of them belongs to your family." Celine woke to the sound of whispers. The voices floated around her like smoke, urgent and hushed. Her eyes remained closed, but her Omega hearing caught every word with crystal clarity. Never seen anything like it in 40 years of healing. 2 alpha bloodlines? That's impossible. The child would be dangerous. Too dangerous to live. Celine's hand instinctively moved to her belly, finding it still round and firm. The baby was safe. For now. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in her surroundings. Gone was the cold stone and storm. Instead, she lay in a bed softer than clouds, surrounded by walls of warm golden stone. Tapestries depicting great wolves hung from the ceiling, and a fire crackled peacefully in an ornate fireplace. The royal wing. The Alpha King hadn't been lying about his protection. "Ah, you're awake." The voice belonged to an elderly woman with silver hair braided with healing crystals. "The healer from last night." How are you feeling, child? Like I've been running for 3 months, Celine said honestly, her voice still rough. She tried to sit up, wincing as her muscles protested. The baby is strong. Stronger than it should be at this stage. The healer's eyes narrowed slightly. What's your name, Omega? Celine hesitated. Names had power, especially here. Celine. Celine what? What pack? The door burst open before Celine could answer, and the Alpha King himself strode in. In daylight, he was even more imposing than she remembered. Tall and broad-shouldered, with golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her. His presence filled the room like a physical force. Leave us, he commanded the healer. My lord, I really should. Now. The woman bowed and hurried out, but not before shooting Celine a look that clearly said, be careful. Cale approached the bed slowly, like he was approaching a wounded wolf that might bolt. His eyes never left her face, searching for something she couldn't identify. You smell like blood, Fong, he said without preamble. Celine's blood turned to ice. She had hoped the rain and mud would have washed away any trace of her heritage. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. The Bloodfang pack was destroyed 60 years ago. Every member hunted down and killed. Yet here you sit in my fortress, carrying their scent like a banner. Maybe your nose is wrong, Celine shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. But desperation made wolves brave. Maybe I just smell like whoever I've been running from. Cale's eyes flashed, and for a moment she thought she'd gone too far. Then something that might have been admiration crossed his features. Who is the father of your child? That's none of your business. Everything that happens in my territory is my business. Especially when it involves bloodlines that shouldn't exist. He leaned closer, his scent washing over her. Pine and storm and something wildly masculine that made her Omega instincts purr. Who is the father? Celine lifted her chin defiantly. Someone who's dead. That's all you need to know. Dead how? The question hit like a physical blow. Celine's composure cracked, and she turned away from his piercing gaze. Hunted. Like an animal. Because he loved the wrong person. The pain in her voice must have reached him, because his expression softened fractionally. Tell me about him. Why? So you can dig up his bones and scatter them to the winds. So I can understand what kind of danger you've brought to my doorstep. Celine was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. He was kind and gentle, and he made me believe that maybe the old hatred between the packs didn't have to define us forever. She looked up at Cale, tears threatening. He was wrong. What was his name? It doesn't matter now. But Cale was studying her face with the intensity of a hunter tracking prey. Something in her expression, some flicker of memory or pain, made his entire body go rigid. Show me your hands, he commanded suddenly. What? Your hands. Show me. Confused and wary, Celine held out her hands. They were small and delicate, marked with calluses from her long flight. But on her left ring finger, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a thin white scar in the shape of a crescent moon. Cale's face went ashen. Where did you get that scar? It's from a bonding ceremony. A private 1-inch. Her voice grew even quieter. We cut our palms and pressed them together. Mixed our blood under the moon. When? 6 months ago. Right before the hunters found us. Cale staggered backward as if she'd struck him. His golden eyes were wide with something between horror and disbelief. Describe him, he said hoarsely. Describe the father of your child. I already told you he's dead. What does it matter? Describe him. The roar echoed through the chamber like thunder. Celine flinched, her hands protective over her belly. But something in his desperation made her answer. Tall. Dark hair like yours but longer. golden eyes that turned silver when he was angry, a scar across his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. Her voice grew softer, lost in memory. He had the most beautiful smile, and he always smelled like winter forests in freedom. Cale's knees buckled, and he had to grip the bedpost for support. The description matched perfectly. Every detail. Every impossible detail. "What was his name?" he whispered. Celine hesitated, then lifted her chin with quiet pride. "Damon. Damon Stormfang. He said he used to be a prince, but that was before." She stopped, the words dying in her throat as she saw the expression on Cale's face. Pure absolute shock. "Before what?" he asked, though his voice sounded like it came from very far away. "Before his brother banished him," she finished quietly. "Before the Alpha King declared him dead and sent hunters after him for the crime of refusing an arranged marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. Cale stared at her as if she were a ghost, his face cycling through a dozen emotions too quickly to track. "Damon is my half-brother," he said finally. "And if what you're telling me is true, then the child you carry isn't just forbidden." He met her eyes, and she saw her own fear reflected back at her. "It's the rightful heir to my throne." The Elder Council chamber sat deep beneath the fortress, carved from living rock and lit by ancient crystals that pulsed with their own inner light. 7 figures in dark robes sat around a circular table, their faces hidden in shadow except for gleaming eyes that reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom and cunning. Cale stood before them, his usual confidence replaced by something far more dangerous: uncertainty. "You summoned us at dawn, Your Majesty," spoke Elder Thorn, his voice like grinding stone. "This is highly irregular. So is having a pregnant Omega carrying my half-brother's child sleeping in the royal wing," Cale replied grimly. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even breathing could be heard as the implications sank in. Elder Mira was the first to speak, her voice sharp as winter wind. "Damon is dead. You declared it yourself 5 years ago. Apparently I was wrong." "Then we have a problem." Elder Blackwood leaned forward, his ancient face creasing with displeasure. "If the Omega speaks truth, and this child carries Stormfang blood, it has legitimate claim to the throne," finished Elder Thorn. "More legitimate than yours, technically speaking." Cale's jaw clenched. As the second son, he had only inherited the crown after Damon's exile and supposed death. If his half-brother had sired an heir, "The bloodline is irrelevant," Elder Ravencrest interjected, her voice cold as ice. "The child also carries Bloodfang heritage. That makes it an abomination." "Does it?" Elder Wyatt asked thoughtfully. "Or does it make it the most powerful alpha born in 3 generations?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Elder Mira stood abruptly, her robes rustling. "I've consulted the ancient texts since your message arrived, Your Majesty. A child born of both Stormfang and Bloodfang blood." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "The prophecies speak of such a birth." "What prophecies?" Cale demanded. "The prophecy of the dual crown. Written 300 years ago by the Oracle of the Northern Winds." Myra's voice took on the cadence of recitation. "When the blood of Storm and Fang unite in one vessel, the old kingdom shall fall, and a new age shall rise. The child of 2 alphas shall either unite the packs under one banner or destroy them all in fire and shadow." Another silence fell, this one heavy with dread. "Prophecies are just words," Elder Blackwood scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. "We deal in reality, not fairy tales." "The reality," Elder Ravencrest said coldly, "is that if word of this child spreads, every enemy pack in the Northern Territories will unite against us. They'll see it as either a threat to be eliminated or a weapon to be claimed. Then we eliminate the threat before it can grow," Elder Thorn said quietly. Cale's head snapped toward him. "You're suggesting murder." "I'm suggesting survival. The Omega is nothing. A runaway with no pack, no protection. The child doesn't even exist yet in any legal sense. Thorn's eyes glittered in the crystal light. A simple accident during childbirth. These things happen. No, the word came out as a growl, making several elders step back involuntarily. Your Majesty, Elder Mira said carefully, perhaps you're not thinking clearly. You've known this Omega for less than a day. Surely the good of the kingdom. The good of the kingdom doesn't require murdering pregnant Omegas, Kale snarled. Elder Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying the Alpha King with calculating eyes. You're protecting her. It wasn't a question. She came to me for sanctuary. I gave my word. Words can be taken back, Elder Ravencrest said dismissively, especially when the alternative is civil war. Kale turned on her, his golden eyes blazing. Are you questioning my authority? I'm questioning your judgment, she replied without flinching. This Omega has been here one night, and already you're defying your counsel for her sake. What happens when she bears the child? When other packs come calling? When she uses her hold over you two? Her hold over me? Kale's voice was dangerously quiet. Too late. Elder Ravencrest realized her mistake. Your Majesty, I didn't mean. You think I'm compromised because she's an Omega. It wasn't a question. You think I can't make rational decisions because of some supposed alpha attraction. Well, aren't you? Elder Thorn asked bluntly. The question hit like a physical blow because Kale couldn't immediately deny it. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to protect Celine, to keep her close, to ensure her safety above all else. But was that political wisdom or something more primal? I think, he said slowly, that killing innocent Omegas and unborn children is exactly the kind of tyranny my grandfather engaged in. The kind that made the Bloodfang pack our enemies in the first place. Elder Wyatt nodded approvingly. Wisdom often looks like weakness to those who lack it. And mercy often looks like foolishness to those who've forgotten how to show it, added Elder Corvina, speaking for the first time. But Elder Blackwood wasn't finished. If you won't eliminate the threat, then at least contain it. Send her away. Give her gold and guards and send her to the southern territories where she can't cause trouble. And when the child grows up believing I abandoned them? Kale shook his head. When they return with an army and a legitimate grievance. How is that better? Because by then you'll have a dozen heirs of your own, Elder Thorn said practically. Will I? Kale's laugh was bitter. I've had 5 years to produce an heir, and my marriage negotiations keep falling through. Meanwhile, my supposedly dead brother managed to father the next generation. The truth hung between them, uncomfortable and undeniable. Despite his power and position, Kale remained unmated and childless while his exiled brother had found love and continuation. Elder Mira stepped forward, her ancient face creased with something like sympathy. What do you want to do, Your Majesty? Kale was quiet for a long moment, staring at the crystal formations that had watched over council meetings for centuries. Finally, he looked up, and his advisors saw something in his eyes they hadn't seen in years. Determination. I want to see her again, he said simply. I want to hear her full story, and then I want to decide what kind of king I'm going to be. As he strode from the chamber, Elder Ravencrest called after him, and if your decision brings war. Kale paused in the doorway, not turning around. Then at least it will be a war I can live with. But as the great doors closed behind him, none of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from the wall outside, or the soft footsteps that hurried away through the darkness, carrying word of the council's discussion to ears that should never have heard it. Celine stood by the tall windows of her chamber, watching the sun set behind the mountain peaks. 2 days had passed since her shocking revelation about Damon, and the Alpha King had not returned. She wondered if he ever would, or if she would simply be forgotten in this golden cage until her child was born. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. Soon now. Very soon. The door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn to know who it was. His scent filled the room like a storm front moving in, dangerous and electric. "You've been avoiding me," she said without looking back. "I've been thinking," Cale replied, his voice carefully neutral. He moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "About what you told me. About Damon. Regretting your hospitality." Questioning it, his honesty surprised her. "Tell me about the Moonvale Pack. Tell me how this all began." Celine was quiet for a long moment, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of old grief. "Moonvale was a small pack. Peaceful. We lived in the valleys between the territories, claiming no allegiance to any of the great houses." She touched the window, leaving fingerprints on the cold glass. "We thought that would keep us safe. But it didn't. No. When the territorial wars began 5 years ago, small packs like ours became expendable. Everyone wanted our land, our resources. No one wanted our people." Cale's jaw tightened. The territorial wars had been brutal, consuming smaller packs like wildfire. He tried to stay neutral, but neutrality was a luxury only the powerful could afford. "The attack came at dawn," Celine continued, her voice growing distant. "Rogues mostly. Hired by someone who wanted our valley but didn't want to dirty their own hands. My parents. My siblings," she swallowed hard. "I was the only one who escaped." "How?" "I ran. Like a coward. I heard my mother screaming and I ran into the forest and kept running until I couldn't hear the burning anymore." Cale heard the self-loathing in her voice and felt something twist in his chest. "Surviving doesn't make you a coward, doesn't it?" She finally turned to face him, and her silver-gold eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I lived as a rogue for months, stealing food, sleeping in caves, avoiding other wolves. I was dying slowly when Damon found me." "Where?" "The Whispering Woods near the old border stones. I'd collapsed by a stream, too weak to hunt, too proud to beg." A small smile crossed her face, the first real smile Cale had seen from her. "He said I looked like a drowned fox." Despite everything, Cale felt his lips twitch. That sounded like something his brother would say. "He nursed me back to health. Fed me, protected me, never asked for anything in return." Her smile faded. "I should have left when I was strong enough. Should have kept running. But you didn't." "No. Because for the first time since Moonvale burned I felt safe." He had this way of making everything seem possible. Like maybe the world wasn't as cruel as I'd learned it to be. Cale studied her profile, seeing past the exhaustion and fear to the woman beneath. Beautiful, yes, but there was steel there too. Survivor's steel, forged in loss and tempered by hope. "When did you learn who he was?" "Not for weeks. He called himself Damon Wolffriend and said he was a traveling merchant who'd grown tired of pack politics." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I believed him because I wanted to. Because the alternative was being alone again." "What gave him away?" "His scent. One night when we were close, I caught something underneath all that carefully constructed neutrality. Power. Authority. The scent of someone born to rule." She met Cale's eyes. "It smells like yours, actually. Like storm clouds and lightning." Cale felt heat rise in his cheeks, though he couldn't say why. "What did you do when you found out?" "I confronted him. Demanded the truth." Her voice grew soft with memory. "He broke down and told me everything. About being the exiled prince. About the arranged marriage he'd refused. About how he'd rather die free than live as a political pawn. And you stayed." "I stayed." She moved back to the window, watching darkness creep across the mountains. "We had 3 months together. 3 months of pretending we could build a life in the shadows. We talked about finding a place far from the territories, somewhere we could raise a family in peace. But someone found you." Celine's entire body went rigid. "Hunters. Professional ones. They'd been tracking him for months. following rumors and scent trails. Her voice broke. They surrounded our camp in the middle of the night. Damon. He made me promise to run. To protect the baby. You saw them kill him. I heard him die. The words came out raw with pain. I was already in the forest when the screaming started. And then, silence. When I crept back at dawn, there was nothing left but blood and ash. Cale felt something cold settle in his stomach. The hunters he'd sent after Damon had been ordered to bring his brother back alive. If they'd killed him instead. The hunters, he said carefully. Did you see their faces? Their pack markings. Celine shook her head. It was too dark. But their leader. He had a voice like gravel. And he kept saying something about orders from the crown. The words hit Cale like a physical blow. Orders from the crown. His orders. The hunters had been acting on his authority when they killed Damon. He'd killed his own brother. Celine, he began, his voice hoarse with guilt and horror. But she wasn't finished. There's something else. Something I haven't told you. She turned to face him fully, her expression grave. Damon knew he was being hunted. In those last weeks he'd gotten paranoid, jumpy, but he also started talking about you. Me. He said if anything happened to him I should come here. To the Alpha King. He said. She hesitated, as if the words were difficult to speak. He said his brother was a good man who'd been forced to make impossible choices, and that if I ever needed sanctuary, you'd honor the blood between you. Cale staggered backward as if she'd struck him. Damon had trusted him. Even after the exile, even while running from the hunters Cale had sent, his brother had believed in him. Had died believing in him. He was wrong, Cale whispered. Was he? Celine stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. You gave me sanctuary when you could have turned me away. You've protected me when your own counsel advised against it. Maybe he knew you better than you know yourself. Before Cale could respond, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Shouts, the sound of running feet, the harsh blast of warning horns. Both of them rushed to the window and looked down to see torches moving through the darkness like angry stars. The gates were opening and wolves were streaming through. More wolves than should be possible. What's happening? Celine breathed. Cale's face had gone pale. We're under attack. The first arrow struck the window beside Celine's head, shattering the glass into 1,000 glittering fragments. Cale threw himself forward, tackling her to the ground as more projectiles whistled through the air where she'd been standing. Stay down, he commanded, his body covering hers protectively. Through the broken window they could hear the sounds of battle erupting across the fortress. Howls of rage, the clash of steel, the distinctive crack of bones breaking as wolves shifted into their beast forms. Celine gasped suddenly, her hands flying to her belly. No, not now. What is it? The baby, she panted, her face going pale. It's coming. The stress, the fear. I can't stop it. A roar echoed through the corridors outside, followed by the heavy sound of running footsteps. Cale's head snapped toward the door, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury. Marcus, he bellowed. His guard captain burst through the door, his armor bloodied and his sword drawn. My lord, the fortress is breached. Rogues came through the eastern tunnels. We never saw them coming. How many? At least 50. Maybe more. They're not just attacking randomly. They're heading straight for the royal wing. Marcus's eyes widened as he saw Celine doubled over in pain. My lord, is she? Get the healer. Now Cale's voice cut like a blade through the chaos. The healers tending to the wounded in the great hall. Then bring her here. I don't care if you have to carry her. Cale turned back to Celine, who was breathing in sharp, painful gasps. How long between the pains? Minutes, she managed. Maybe less. This is happening too fast. Something's wrong. Another wave of attackers thundered past the door, their howls filling the air with promises of violence. Through the sounds of battle, a voice rang out, harsh and commanding. Find the Omega. She's here somewhere. The scent is strong. Kale's blood turned to ice. They weren't just attacking his fortress. They were hunting Celine specifically. Who knows you're here? He demanded. Celine shook her head weakly. No one. I was so careful. Another contraction hit her, stronger than the last, and she cried out despite herself. My lord, Marcus said urgently. We need to move her to the safe chambers below. If they're targeting her specifically. She can't be moved, Kale snapped. The baby's coming now. As if to prove his point, Celine's scream echoed through the chamber. But this time something else happened. As her cry reached its peak, every wolf in the fortress, attacker and defender alike, suddenly stopped fighting. The power that erupted from her was like nothing Kale had ever felt. Ancient. Primal. The very stones of the fortress seemed to vibrate with it, and for one impossible moment, he could swear he felt the presence of something vast and otherworldly. What was that? Marcus whispered, his face pale with shock. The child, Celine gasped. It's calling to them. Through the broken window came an answering howl, but this one was different. Where the rogue's cries had been filled with bloodlust and rage, this new voice carried authority, command, the sound of an alpha asserting dominance. Impossible, Kale breathed. But it wasn't impossible. The child wasn't even born yet, but already its power was manifesting. Already it was claiming its place in the hierarchy of wolves. The battle sounds changed immediately. Where before there had been chaos, now there was purpose. The rogues were regrouping, following the call of something stronger than themselves. My lord, Marcus said desperately, we have to. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. 3 rogues burst through, their eyes wild with hunting fever. The leader was a massive brute with scars covering his arms and the distinctive red markings of the Bloodfang loyalists painted on his face. There she is, he snarled, his gaze fixing on Celine. The Omega who carries the lost prince's whelp. Kale rose smoothly, placing himself between the attackers and Celine. His sword appeared in his hand as if by magic, the steel singing as it caught the firelight. You want her, you go through me. Gladly, the lead rogue shifted, bones cracking and reforming as he took on his wolf form. He was huge, nearly as large as Kale's own beast, with matted fur and yellow eyes that promised death. The other 2 followed suit, and suddenly the chamber was filled with snarling monsters circling like sharks scenting blood. Behind him, Celine cried out again, and once more that impossible power pulsed through the fortress. This time Kale felt it in his own bones. A call that demanded obedience, respect, recognition. The unborn child was asserting dominance over every wolf within miles. Feel that, do you? The lead rogue said, his voice distorted by his shifted form. That's the power we've been waiting for. The power that should have been ours by right. The Bloodfang pack is dead, Kale snarled back, his own wolf pushing at the boundaries of his control. Are we? The rogue laughed, a sound like grinding bones. We've been hiding in the shadows for 60 years, waiting for the prophecy to come true. Waiting for the birth that would give us back what your family stole. You're too late. The child will be born under my protection. Will it? The rogue's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. Because according to our sources, your own council wants the whelp dead. How long before they decide you're too compromised to rule? How long before they remove both you and your precious Omega? The words hit like arrows because they carried the ring of truth. Someone had betrayed the council's discussions to the Bloodfang loyalists. Someone inside his own fortress was working against him. Another contraction seized Celine, and this time her scream was accompanied by something else. The distinctive sound of rushing water as her body prepared for birth. The baby's coming, she gasped. I can't, I need. You need to die, the lead rogue snarled, launching himself forward with claws extended. Kale met him in midair. and the collision shook the entire chamber. Steel met claw and blood began to flow. Behind them, the other two rogues circled, waiting for their chance to strike. But as they fought, none of them noticed the small figure that had appeared in the doorway, the healer clutching her bag of supplies and staring in horror at the chaos. And none of them saw the shadow that detached itself from the wall behind her, moving with predatory grace toward Celine's vulnerable form. The real threat wasn't the rogues they could see. It was the assassin they couldn't. Celine's next cry shattered the night air, and with it came the first wail of a newborn child entering the world. The sound echoed through the fortress like a battle horn, announcing the arrival of the most dangerous creature any of them had ever encountered. The heir to two ancient bloodlines. The child of prophecy. And as the baby's cry reached its peak, every wolf in the Northern Territories felt it. A pulse of power that would reshape the world forever. The baby's cry cut through the chaos like a silver blade. And for one impossible moment, everything stopped. The rogues froze mid-attack. Kale's sword hung suspended in the air. Even the flames in the fireplace seemed to pause, as if the very elements were bowing to the newborn's power. In that crystalline silence, Celine cradled her child. A perfect, beautiful baby with eyes that already blazed with intelligence far beyond its moments of life. Those eyes were neither fully gold like the Stormfangs nor silver like the ancient Bloodfangs, but something entirely new. A swirling mixture that seemed to capture starlight itself. The lead rogue was the first to break free of the spell. "Kill them both," he snarled, lunging forward with claws extended toward the vulnerable mother and child. He never reached them. Kale moved with inhuman speed, his blade finding the rogue's heart before the creature could take another step. The second attacker met a similar fate, while the third found himself facing not just the Alpha King, but Marcus and 3 other guards who had finally fought their way through to the royal chamber. But even as the immediate threat ended, a new one emerged from the shadows. Elder Ravencrest stepped into the room, no longer wearing council robes but dressed in the dark leather of an assassin. In her hand gleamed a poisoned blade, and her ancient eyes burned with fanatical purpose. "Forgive me, your majesty," she said without a trace of remorse. "But this abomination cannot be allowed to live." "Stand down, Ravencrest," Kale commanded, his sword still dripping with rogue blood. "I cannot. The child's power, you felt it. We all did. It will unite every enemy pack against us, or worse, it will grow strong enough to claim your throne by force." She took a step closer to Celine, who clutched her baby protectively. "Better to end this now mercifully, than wait for the prophecy to destroy us all." "The prophecy speaks of unity or destruction," Celine said quietly, her voice still weak from childbirth but carrying absolute conviction. "Perhaps the choice of which path to take lies not with the child, but with those who guide them." Ravencrest's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Pretty words from a traitor's whore. The insult hung in the air like poison. Kale's eyes blazed with fury, but before he could respond, the baby stirred in Celine's arms and made a soft cooing sound. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every person in the room felt it. A wave of pure, innocent joy that washed away anger and fear and hatred. For just a moment, they all remembered what it felt like to believe in hope. Even Ravencrest faltered, her weapon trembling in her grip. "You see," Celine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This child isn't a weapon or a curse. They're just innocent. Pure. Everything we could be if we chose love over fear." The baby's eyes fixed on Kale, and he felt something crack open in his chest. This wasn't just Damon's child or a political complication or a prophetic threat. This was family. This was the future. This was a chance to break the cycle of violence and hatred that had consumed their world for generations. He made his choice. "Lower your weapon, Ravencrest." "I cannot." "You will. Or you'll join the rogues." His voice carried the absolute authority of an Alpha King, who had finally found his true purpose. "I am claiming this child as my own. Officially. Publicly. Anyone who threatens them threatens me directly. The elder's face went pale. Your Majesty, think about what you're saying. I have Kale moved to stand beside Celine's bed. Close enough that his scent would mingle with hers and the baby's. Close enough to make his claim unmistakable. This child carries Stormfang blood. That makes them my family. That makes them my responsibility. The Council will never accept. The Council will accept what I tell them to accept. I am the Alpha King, not their puppet. He looked down at the baby, who had wrapped one tiny fist around his finger with surprising strength. What's the child's name? Alexander Stormfang, Kale said formally, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. My nephew. My heir. Under my protection and bearing my name. The baby Alexander made another soft sound, and the pulse of power that followed was different this time. Not commanding or overwhelming but warm. Welcoming. Like a hearth fire on a cold night, drawing everyone closer instead of driving them away. Even Ravencrest lowered her weapon, though her face remained troubled. The other packs, she said quietly, when they learn of this. Let them come, Kale said simply. Let them see that the age of ancient grudges is over. That we choose unity over division, hope over fear. He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. Anyone who cannot accept that is welcome to find service elsewhere. Marcus stepped forward, dropping to one knee. I serve the Stormfang line, Your Majesty. All of the Stormfang line. One by one, the other guards followed suit. Even the healer, who had been quietly tending to Celine throughout the confrontation, bowed her head in acceptance. Only Ravencrest remained standing, her ancient face a mask of uncertainty. The prophecy, she began, will be what we make of it, Kale finished. He reached down and carefully took Alexander from Celine's arms. The baby settled against his chest as if he belonged there, tiny fingers grasping at the fabric of his shirt. As he held his brother's child, his son now by choice and love if not by blood, Kale felt the weight of destiny settling around them like a cloak. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, political maneuvering, perhaps even war. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing the future alone. What happens now? Celine asked softly. Kale looked down at her. This brave Omega who had risked everything to protect her child. This woman who had somehow managed to crack open his carefully guarded heart in the space of a few days. Now, he said, we change the world. Outside the fortress, the sun began to rise, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. A new day was dawning, and with it a new age. In his arms, Alexander opened his extraordinary eyes and looked up at the man who had chosen to be his father. And in that gaze, Kale saw not the destruction prophesied by ancient seers, but something far more powerful and far more dangerous to their enemies. He saw hope. The age of the dual crown had begun.